Hello. Our story begins on Coruscant, where Mace Windu was speedily shooting across the city with a vulture droid under his command. He was made aware of the hunt made by General Grievous, and he stopped his current working as a General of the Skies to focus on the potential threat to the Chancellor. Mace understood that Palpatine's importance for Republic morale could not be understated. If they lost Palpatine to Grievous before the end of the battle, then the Republic itself would be at a serious loss. Palpatine was a necessary tool for the system. He held a position that the Separatists were able to respect in their own right. If he was removed, then they would see fragility within the Republic. However, there was something else. Palpatine was the target of a Jedi plot, and Mace needed to ensure that Palpatine was dealt with by internal matters. If he wasn't, then his lack of disappearance would lead to unforeseen outcomes, one he and the Council were not willing to put themselves through. Mace eventually slipped down into the lower level room where Shakti had been temporarily captured. The other Jedi, with her, were slaughtered. Windu freed her and left immediately to stop General Grievous from escaping the surface of the planet. When he first arrived at the takeoff zone, General Grievous was preparing to load up into a vessel that hadn't landed yet, and this gave Mace the perfect opportunity. Using his above-ground leverage, he shot into the air, using the force upon getting above the droids and their general to crush their circuitry, dropping the multitude of Magna Guards surrounding Grievous and Palpatine, which inevitably led to his freedom. Mace slammed down on the ground, creating a shockwave that sent Grievous tumbling, as Palpatine scurried away like a lost old man. Mace looked over to the Chancellor and told him to stay behind him, as Grievous got up, challenging Mace to a duel with their sabers, believing that he would have no issue killing the Jedi Master without using the Force. Mace was actually preparing to crush General Grievous's ribcage, but decided to hold off, so he listened, giving Grievous a chance, but before he did do that, Mace looked up and, in a similar manner to Yoda, ensured Grievous's escape didn't land. The thrusters on the landing vessel were ripped off of it, and Mace turned back to Grievous, telling him to begin. 4 lightsabers ignited off the rip, and he lunged towards Mace Windu, who quickly defended himself. Palpatine was shoved out of the way, as Mace swept his hands to hold his lightsaber with steadiness. The two opponents got deeply interlocked into a duel. For Palpatine, he used this as a chance to study the Jedi Master, but Windu wasn't even showing his best cards yet. He knew how General Grievous worked. They'd faced off during the war, and the droid cybernetics were able to pick through Mace's use of Form 7. This time would drastically be different. Master of the Order and Separatist General traded blows with one another. There wasn't even a step of hesitancy in their duel, as Windu used all of his strength to shove Grievous away from him. Mace started with Form 7, throwing Grievous into a heavy assault mode, before Windu slipped back into Form 2, jumping up into Form 5, and slowly dipping into Form 4. Grievous got very irritated with these movements from Windu. Mace quickly ducked out of the way, forcing the droid general to take an aggressive stance. The more Mace switched his forms, the more Grievous got aggravated. Mace leapt backwards, allowing Grievous to slam his 2 sabers into the ground, as the Jedi Master gracefully landed behind his previous position. Grievous lunged forward, only for Mace to counter aggressively, and before their blades collided he shifted into Form 3, pressing Grievous to falter off balance. But this was not the droid general's end. Mace and the Jedi of the Council, those who had survived their encounters with Grievous, had concocted a strategy to defeat him. As Mace backpedaled his way into the building, he watched Palpatine look towards the sky, as if he were waiting for something. Shakti, on the other hand, despite her previous injuries, was on her way to ensure Palpatine was not abducted once more. Mace ducked a strike and was thrown into a pillar, before slipping his strike forward and crushing through one of Grievous's arms, removing a lightsaber with the strike. The droid general got even more furious, dipping his saber into the ground and twirling the 3 hands he had left, which gave Mace a chance to avoid these strikes, leaping over Grievous and instead of landing, planting his lightsaber into the wall and using it to hold him up, before leaping down and using the shock of his landing to throw Grievous into the same pillar. Their blades collided again, and for the final leg of their engagement, Mace held his form with Form 1. Due to it being the most basic lightsaber form, every Jedi knew it, but there was something special about this form. It, even after all the years of being a droid general, could not be studied by Grievous's cybernetics. Its random strikes created a total nightmare for General Grievous, one that he couldn't really stop. Because the strikes were so uncoordinated, he started pushing Mace back, but he was simultaneously losing the fight. Mace was led up into the 2nd level of the building, where another Grievous arm was removed, and when the chance presented itself, Mace ducked another frustrated strike before shoving his lightsaber into Grievous's abdomen and telling him to be gone, before flinging him out of an upstairs window and down towards the surface where Shakti and Palpatine were waiting. Mace looked down, removing something from his belt, something he shielded with a communication device, as he was trying to get into contact with General Skywalker's and Kenobi, but the communication relay had been blocked from their position. Another Jedi, however, was able to get in contact with them, informing them of the Chancellor's capture, something that hadn't fully happened yet. When the two of them arrived, they were able to break through the arena of combat and land on the Invisible Hand, where they would begin their search for Palpatine. Dooku was made aware of Grievous's destruction and the loss of the ground combat. The initial plan to get Skywalker to Coruscant had failed, and upon realizing it, something wasn't right here. When Dooku was informed of the two Jedi within the Invisible Hand, he decided that it was time to leave Coruscant. He was already breaking out of the battle lines, but this was an extra incentive to do so, and with Obi-Wan and Anakin inside the vessel, they were transported away from the capital of the galaxy. Obi-Wan and Anakin were still under the impression that they were at Coruscant, and they believed that Grievous and Palpatine were still here. Mace had desperately tried to get into contact with the two of them, but it didn't work. In the meantime, inside the Invisible Hand, Obi-Wan and Anakin entered the tower of the vessel, searching for the Chancellor but finding no one. Dooku watched these two closely from the bridge. If he actually focused on the fight, he could win these respective duels, but he wasn't sure where to start. He eyed Kenobi though. His intention was to separate the two of them before they reached Utapau. Once they arrived, he would kill both of them or imprison them both, depending on his mood. Inside of the halls of the ship, Kenobi and Skywalker continued to rush through, looking for anyone or anything, though they were still finding nothing. As they continued running down the corridor, Kenobi was trapped individually inside of a ray shield. Anakin turned back and looked at it, before turning to the ceiling. He was preparing to spear his lightsaber into it, when Obi-Wan told him to duck, which he did, as a B-2 rocket slipped past his head, even burning a couple strands of hair off of it. He turned back, seeing battle droids fan out into the hallway. The two Jedi knew that this was a trap, because these droids were waiting for their opportunity to pounce. Anakin defended himself from blaster shots before slipping behind the ray shield, knowing that they wouldn't be able to pierce it. He contacted R2, telling the astromech to get to their level and free Obi-Wan. He turned back, telling his master that he would run a distraction. Kenobi nodded his head, holding his lightsaber just in case Anakin broke the shields down, but due to so many battle droids, he decided it wouldn't be best to let Obi-Wan out. At the current moment, the B-2s were unloading all their firepower into the shield, because it wouldn't break. No reason to get Kenobi killed by letting him out. Skywalker would be fine on his own as it was. He defended himself, slipping backwards as he did, and ricocheting shots back into the battle droids as they approached. He got to the end of a multiple hull corridor when 3 destroyer droids showed up, forcing him further away from the hallway that Kenobi was in. On the other hand, Dooku slyly walked out of the doors at the end of the hall, smiling to see Kenobi. He told Obi-Wan that he should have accepted his offer on Geonosis. Sadly, he was left with no choice but to exterminate the rest of his own Jedi lineage, starting with him and Skywalker. Obi-Wan readied himself, and before the shield doors dropped, R2 tried to buzz Dooku, but the Sith Lord lifted the astromech off the ground, using the Force to crush his chest and shut down the rodent droid. Dooku tossed the husk of R2 at the wall, further denting it. His eyes moved back over to Kenobi with a smile. Time for their chance to finish what they started on Geonosis. No Skywalker, no Yoda, no distractions. Their lightsabers ignited and they thrusted into an engagement. Obi-Wan immediately going for defense, but Dooku had no intention of meeting up with Anakin during this engagement. The doors behind Kenobi had already been sealed, thanks to the B-2s, still currently chasing down Anakin. Obi-Wan and Dooku clashed against the wall. As Kenobi searched for a way out of this, he slipped around Dooku and defended one strike after another, but even his Form 3 was wearing on him. Kenobi fell behind in defenses as Tyrannus lifted him off the ground and lobbed him into the side of the wall. When he hit the ground, he swung his lightsaber up to defend himself, before getting back to his feet and continuing to fall backwards. Skywalker in the other hallway wasn't having a much easier time. The B-2s were firing over the back of the destroyer droids, which made it nearly impossible for him to actually hit a target on the B-2s themselves. Anakin dipped behind the wall and did what he could to take out the droids. But instead of actually following through with that, he decided the best way out of this was to run around the corridors and hope that he could get back to Kenobi before Grievous did. Obi-Wan inversely was slammed up to the wall as Dooku held his lightsaber out, before dipping back, jumping over a strike, and slapping Kenobi backwards, throwing him off balance where one final strike to the back would kill Obi-Wan. Dooku didn't make an instantaneous kill, just a painful one. Obi-Wan held his back in agony as he looked over to Dooku. His vision started to get a little foggy, and he tried to stop the Sith Lord, but before Tyrannus left, he parted with an electrocution, submitting Obi-Wan into even more suffering, before he slipped into an adjacent corridor to prepare for their exit to Utapau. Dooku had a lot more important tasks to worry about. Skywalker eventually got around the corridors after cutting through a couple walls and found himself at the same hall where everything started. He found R2 first and stopped by his side, finding that the droid was completely shot down. It would take a miracle to get him restarted again. His eyes then went from R2 to Obi-Wan, who was just hidden outside of his peripheral vision. He could see that Kenobi had survived the initial strike, but Obi-Wan died before Anakin ever got back. He held his former teacher in his arms and tried to wake him back up, asking for Obi-Wan to come back to him, but there was no response. He held Obi-Wan tighter and tighter until the marching of battle droids could be heard in the distance. He didn't know what to do now. His eyes looked back to R2 and then to Obi-Wan. Anakin wiped tears away from his eyes with his sleeve as he laid Obi-Wan down and took his lightsaber off the ground. Anakin would grab R2 and carry him into the main hangar bay, where he would use the Separatist shuttle to abandon the invisible hand and land outside of one of the many craters on the surface of Utapau. The Providence Dreadnought was placed right above the main crater, where Dooku was regathering his forces for his own counter-move. He by this point assumed Palpatine let Obi-Wan and Anakin go onto the invisible hand to kill him, so he was preparing to make a strike against the Republic with a reserve fleet. He didn't care anymore. It was time for the Jedi and the Republic to pay for what they had done to the galaxy. On the surface of Utapau, Anakin's shuttle with a disabled tracker landed far outside the view of the invisible hand. He went into the main bay of the shuttle and picked up pieces of R2. His entire mainframe was crushed, and it was very unlikely that he would ever be able to function again. Anakin sat with himself for a moment, holding R2 in his lap, and really feeling the emotions he had to suppress inside the Separatist battleship. His eyes watered over the death of Obi-Wan and the apparent destruction of R2-D2. He patted the side of the droid's body, like he would if R2 had survived. He choked on air and released all of his pain. It was unfair, it wasn't right, and he wished he never left Obi-Wan alone. If he remained behind, Kenobi would still be alive and R2 would never be in such peril. Instead of hunting down Dooku immediately, he tried to raise his spirits by working on R2 and repairing the droid here inside the shuttle, just to get him to feel more motivated. There were some parts that he could use, but he'd have to work fast. He did initially consider contacting the Republic, but the invisible hand and the Separatist blockade around Utapau was blocking all long-range communication from non-verified sources or outputs. No one would know that the Pa'un people were in danger, that Skywalker was here, or that the remaining leadership for the Separatist movement remained here. Dooku sent the Separatist Council to Raxus, where they would usurp the government and instate themselves as political leaders. The intention was to draw the Republic military towards Raxus, while the rest of the Separatist war machine operated off of Utapau. With the activation of the reserve fleet, he prepared for a strike deep within the core. He was just going to have to be patient with it. Anakin's work on R2 went very poorly. He couldn't even get the droid to turn on. He, himself, couldn't even see. Every few minutes his eyes would start watering again, as a shocking pain rolled over his body, from his shoulders to his toes. He felt it everywhere within him, even though such pain was simply emotional. He continued to work on R2 throughout the night, using every tool within the shuttle that he could. Sitting out under the Utapau night sky reminded him of his stay here with Obi-Wan, a few months before this and a few months after Ahsoka's departure from the Order. He simply sat silently looking up to the stars, trying to find some peace for his emotional burden, but none came to him. Anakin continued to play with R2's mainframe, but nothing came of it, until he eventually fell asleep atop his astromech. He promised R2, before his collapse, that he would save him. The first night on Utapau went by quickly, because Anakin was exhausted from the day before, much of this exhaustion coming from his emotional burdens. When he woke up the following day, he was approached by an escaping group of Pa'un refugees. They were the reason he woke up, and they asked him to follow them, seeing the Jedi weapon on his belt and recognizing him as the Jedi Master. Anakin quickly grabbed everything he needed, and the Pa'uns grabbed the R2 unit and placed him on top of one of their bogas. Anakin rode with them as they entered an adjacent crater away from the Separatist battle droids. The Pa'uns explained to him that the Separatists had been here for far too long, and they were preparing what warriors they could. However, if they were going to fight off the droids, they needed to get civilians out of the main compound. Anakin was eager to help in any way he could, because based off of Dooku's movements, reported by the Pa'uns, Dooku was not going anywhere. Anakin saw this as an opportunity to strike, but he would have to be patient as well. The Pa'uns were willing to assist him, being that they could see he was left out here without anyone to aid him, but they also made a deal. They would not assist him unless he helped them remove their refugees from the main city. Anakin, filled with emotions, wanted to take the aggressive option, but he couldn't. In a funny way, like Obi-Wan following Qui-Gon's death, Anakin felt a profound call to act like his former instructor. He believed that in acting like Obi-Wan, he would find the best path to victory here. The issue though was the fact that the Pa'uns couldn't get to the other crater directly from underground. Years ago there was a conflict and waging factions took over control of different craters and sealed up the cave systems with a series of bombs. They now needed to open those up and use them as transportation to the crater that the Separatists were calling home. Anakin was told that there were other freedom fighters on the other side, digging towards them, but he knew that this task would be impossible to complete in a timely manner. He asked to view the Separatist base, and so the Pa'uns would reluctantly take him in the middle of the night. Anakin was eager to finish this up and get back to Coruscant so that they could win the war, but as it turned out, it would be literally impossible for him to get to Tyrannus. He looked down into the crater in the middle of the night, using binoculars to see that they had thousands of battle droids down there, and Dooku wasn't even on the surface. He was sleeping inside of one of the many vessels that were blocking the atmosphere of the planet. Anakin felt a bit hopeless after seeing this, but he promised the Pa'uns that he would aid them in getting their refugees away from the Separatist war machine. The first few weeks for the underground digging was nightmarish. Anakin was completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy, with no answers to what else was happening. Dooku's placement made him think that the Separatists were continuing the war, or that this was Dooku's final stand. Anakin wasn't sure, but the few times that he did get reports about Tyrannus, they were all very similar. He was coming to and from the surface for stabilizing conferences with someone. Apparently the surface long-range communication devices functioned better than the long-range communication devices inside the flagship or her fleet. Though there was some positive news for Anakin. The Pa'uns had resources to fix R2, but he wasn't exactly the same. The astromech had to be carried around inside of a backpack, due to how crushed the body was. It was really the best they could do for him, until Anakin could get back to the core. But essentially, R2 was a little backpack droid. He still had some of his gimmicks, but the most important feature to Anakin was the fact that his droid's personality, memories, and coding were all pretty much the same. The few months that passed by following this would be grueling for Anakin. His desire to know galactic news continued to possess his mind. He had no answers, and the shuttle he originally landed here in had been confiscated by the Separatists. Though luckily for the Pa'uns and Skywalker, they were very well hidden in the caves, so they couldn't be found. Skywalker had become a cave dweller, existing only within darkness. Some might even say he was born in the darkness. Just kidding. Anakin continued to build his camaraderie with his Pa'un brothers and sisters. Their fight was integral to defeating the remnants or the headquarters of the Separatists. Tyrannus' stay here was puzzling, but there had to be a reason for it. Anakin was determined to find out why. Eventually, after 4 or so months of digging, they were able to break through the caverns and free the refugees from the main Separatist crater. When the dawn rose on the next day, they attacked. Skywalker ran in, leading the charge with a brethren he had become very close with, and they rose up to attack the oppressive regime. They came down from above and below. Their bogas were the key to the strategy, and Anakin rode in, atop his own as he used the massive lizard creature to eat through its enemies. The battle droids were unprepared, but they had the forces to counter effectively. Anakin led a detachment into the main headquarters for the Separatists, and found that Dooku wasn't present. As the battle waged on below him, he took R2 off of his back and lay him on the floor, so that he could wheel over to the command center to track Dooku's location. Anakin and the Pa'uns had accidentally made R2 into the first DB-type unit. He was rolling around, but it was very clunky, so that's why he was carried. R2 beeped as Skywalker kept an eye on the battle below them. When they got Dooku's location, they left. Anakin did want to continue helping the Pa'uns, and he did a little, but he was more focused on the task at hand. When he landed inside the Invisible Hand, he tracked Dooku's location to the top tower in the ship. It was initially a prison cell, but reconfigured into a bedroom of sorts for Dooku. Around the room there were no longer conference tables, but communication devices, battle maps, and tactics that the CIS planned on using. Watching over the ensuing battle was Dooku, with his arms pinned behind his back. The war he had fought was in a position he found unfavorable, and he turned back to Skywalker with resolution. This was his final chance to rid the galaxy of something he hated. Tyrannus knew Anakin was cut off from information, so he didn't allude to anything, especially because he wanted to kill Skywalker himself with confusion on his mind. After this battle, Dooku would go and hide away in the unknown regions for the rest of his life. The lightsabers ignited, Anakin using both his own and Obi-Wan's as they leapt towards each other. In a weird way, Dooku looked as if he hadn't aged a day since their previous encounter. This told Anakin to be wary of whatever tricks Dooku might have up his sleeve. Their sabers collided, and he could feel Tyrannus' natural strength returning. His speed was quicker than it had been before Coruscant. The Skywalker had been training for this engagement, especially with two sabers. He ducked and blocked, leaping over a strike and using the communication table to lob himself down at Dooku, who defended the strikes adequately. Anakin pulled back, avoiding a strike, using one of his hands to hold himself off the ground, and using the momentum, he kicked the Sith Lord's hand backwards, forcing Tyrannus to recoil. They came towards each other again, clashing in the middle before breaking off and attacking with intense speeds, and not using any sort of pattern or method. Dooku wanted this kill so badly, as he slashed a panel of light, blinding Anakin temporarily as he covered his eyes. He bounced away and Dooku slowly paced around him. Anakin uncovered his eyes and he couldn't see much aside from stars. He slowed his breath and tried not to panic, listening to the force around him. Dooku moved away from Anakin, speaking about Obi-Wan's death, trying to entice him to fall into darkness. But in the same way that he adopted attributes of Obi-Wan in the day-to-day with the Pa'uns, he also started using Obi-Wan's methods of the Force and saber combat. Dooku swung in. The Force never lied. Anakin sidestepped, slashing down and blocking Tyrannus back, who tried to seize the advantage, becoming frustrated that a blind Anakin survived that. Skywalker was still seeing stars as he ducked away, allowing his mind's eye to tell him where everything was. Dooku's own frustration started to eat away at him, as Anakin clocked Dooku's saber with Obi-Wan's before using his momentum to spin Tyrannus' saber over his head, where he then dragged the weapon across his stomach, ending his life in one quick swipe. Due to his temporary blindness, he couldn't tell if he actually won or not, but when his vision fully returned, he was relieved. Skywalker sent out a distress signal using his personal code and abandoned the Invisible Hand to assist the warriors on the surface. During their fight, the Republic would arrive and demolish the Separatist blockade as the Pa'un warriors and Skywalker on the ground finally got their reinforcements. Utapau would be saved. Mace Windu's fleet would be the rescuers, with the 187th Battalion leading the charge on the surface. Ironically, the person to find Anakin was not Windu or the commander. It was Jedi Knight Ahsoka Tano. She had dedicated her life to the Order once more, and she had dedicated her time to finding Anakin and saving him. Anakin embraced her with a massive hug when he first saw her, as Mace and he bowed to each other when they reunited. There was so much for Skywalker to learn. For now, they were going to reconstruct R2, and Ahsoka was going to get him some much needed rest inside the command ship. Anakin could see the physical change in Ahsoka's eyes. Something had happened. It was the truth. Dooku set the Separatist Council up on Raxus, and lured the Republic in after them. He then made a radical strike at the core once more, shredding through Coruscant's defenses. Yes, Padme was alright. The Second Battle of Coruscant was a defining blow to the Republic, but they held the planet after a few planetary cycles, though this was used by the Jedi as something else. Before Anakin and Obi-Wan were sent away from Coruscant, Mace had removed more than just his communication device from his belt. He planted poison in the Palpatine's back to see if it would kill him. It initially didn't, but that initial dosage told the Jedi everything they needed to know. Another round of poison would be the killer of Palpatine, and the Jedi would point to Grievous as the carrier of said poison, ridding the Jedi of any potential blame. The war itself wasn't too grueling aside from that. After they held Coruscant again, they were able to finish off the Outer Rim sieges, which led to the hunt for Dooku. Because he sent all of his resources towards Coruscant, the Jedi were able to just finish up their campaigns. Now that it was all complete, the rest of the war was finished. The Separatist Council didn't just usurp the Confederacy, they killed everyone within its government. The war was finally over, and Skywalker's resistance here on Utapau was why it was able to come to a conclusion. But Mace was right. Anakin was tired. He would sleep for multiple days until they returned to Coruscant. R2 would be fully fixed, Anakin would get to reunite with Padme, and there'd be a funeral for Obi-Wan Kenobi. His saber would be buried, and the Jedi Master who held a temporary spot on the Council would forfeit it to Anakin so that he might become a member of the highest council in the Order. Anakin would accept that. Meeting Luke and Leia, whose names weren't fully named yet, was a great joy for him, and he truthfully couldn't be happier with his little family. The death of his best friend would be a constant reminder of what the war cost him, but with the Sith destroyed or captured, it was time to turn the page in the galactic history books. A couple decades from the end of the Clone Wars would see remarkable change in the galaxy. The Jedi expansion to the older outposts would be the beginning of Jedi knighthood resurgence in the public eye. The Order was seen everywhere, and this project was the brainchild of Ahsoka, Mace, Plo, Shaak Ti, and Anakin. Their decision to move the Order outside of Coruscant would inspire people to trust in the Jedi once again. The Skywalker twins would have a younger sibling, but none of the three would ever find their home inside the Jedi Order. Padme had served as Chancellor for 2 terms following the Clone Wars, and was very integral to the reunification between the former Confederacy, Neutral Systems, and Republic. Master Skywalker would have finished the training of 2 more students, and would find himself in Mace Windu's old role, as Grandmaster Windu retired to begin his own retirement as spiritual leader of the Order, something Yoda had done before his own passing. Anakin would oversee the new golden age of the Republic, and of the Jedi Order, and despite his family being private, he would be the original change of the attachment rules within the Order. While he wouldn't fully see the change to its completion, he would be the architect of it, something that Ahsoka would finish for him. This new approach to the Jedi way would propel the Order into a future direction of grand expansion and integral importance to the galaxy, one now fueled by hope for a better future, and one completely free from the reign of the Sith. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Thor Wells, Darth Maelstrom, Ozpin, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Brood36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tib, CC2024, Gallivan Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granted D. Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Colin Rooney, Sharp McDory, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlinger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sense Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Youngling Slayer 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Lakes of Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, Mammoth 3 First Names, Darkseid46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Giveaway down below, almost there, closing in, almost there. Let's talk about this story. So I really wanted to go with this idea that Anakin is kept in the dark, and by keeping him in the dark, I also wanted to keep all of us in the dark, so that you don't really know what's going on. I want that intrigue to be on your mind throughout the video, and I hope I was able to accomplish that for you all. A lot of the times we do a lot of bouncing back and forth, and I thought it'd be interesting to just change it up a little bit by having Anakin as this focus that has no clue what's going on, therefore no one else has any clue what's going on. As for Obi-Wan fans, sorry, like 2 videos in a row where he just gets murked for no reason, sorry about that, but casualties are necessary. But all jokes aside, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.